Welcome back, Rebel fans. You're listening to another episode of the Rebel Talk presented by the Rebel Walk. I'm Cam Wicker, and as always, I'm here with
Zach Moreth.
and we're here to talk a little bit of Ole Miss football just over the past week. Big win last weekend over Wake Forest, 40-6. Wasn't the greatest showing, but we'll talk more about that. I guess we'll hop in, and not too big of a recruiting update. Some big time top 2027 recruits are coming to town this weekend, but it's a huge list to go down there. But Zach has a little recruiting update of a guy who could commit to the Rebels later this month.
Yeah, Cam. So the guy I wanted to talk about was Ladarian Clardy. He's from Pensacola, Florida. He's about a 6 foot, 175, 180-pound safety, really physical. He's rated high 4-star on the majority of the recruiting sites, and it looks like he's down here between UCF, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, Washington, and Florida State. From what it sounds like, it's probably between Ole Miss and Florida State. I really do believe he was going to commit to Ole Miss in August, but he ended up pushing that commitment date back, and I think it's because Florida State made a little bit of a push at him. But if you're judging based off recent events, I wouldn't personally want to play at Florida State. That's just me. It looks like their program after that huge year is not performing at the highest level, to say the least. So I'm hoping, the Rebels can get a big one. This is a guy who Lane has made several recruiting videos for. He calls out Clardy. He's talking to him all the time. It'd be a huge get for Pete Golding, especially a guy coming out of Florida. So this will be huge and definitely something to tune in for this Saturday.
Absolutely, like you said, it seems like Clardy's been on the Ole Miss radar for a little while now. And like you said, Florida State's kind of made a push for him, but like you said as well, Florida State's kind of seeming like they're going towards a downward path right now. So it doesn't seem, great for them in that scenario. But we'll see who Clardy decides on, I guess, here soon. And I think Kiffin's really invested. Kiffin and Golden are really invested in that guy. Moving on to the Wake Forest game this past weekend, 40-6 win. I believe Jackson Dart said the worst 650-yard game he's ever been a part of, or win he's ever been a part of. Like I said, it was. I think I was telling you before the podcast, it's like the sloppiest game I've seen Ole Miss play and still win in blowout fashion. I can't recall a time where I've seen Ole Miss play, turn the ball over several times on offense and still win a game by 30+. It just seemed like even though it wasn't working on offense at times, it still was working for them. And then on the defensive side, the defensive line was smothering as usual.
Yeah, it was. The defensive line they're really scary, Cam. And I don't want to look too far ahead here, but when I was watching that Georgia-Kentucky game, it always feels like there's a game when Georgia plays down to their opponent, like it happens once a year. But just their physicality up front didn't really shock me. I don't think it's up to par with the past Georgia teams. And when you have an Ole Miss defensive line who's able to compete like that, even though it's against Wake Forest, the talent's there, the physicality's there, the length, the weight, the height, all that good stuff. So I think they're going to match up well in the SEC just based off what they've shown against Wake Forest. But I'm going to look at the stats here. Yeah, 46 total rushing yards. And the Wake Forest quarterback finished with -17 rushing yards. He had nowhere to go, nowhere to move in the pocket, got sacked a couple times. And again, the run defense is elite. Moving forward, especially against Georgia Southern, I'd love for the pass defense to kind of step up a little bit. A guy who I'd like to see get a little more playing time is Brandon Turnage. The play that comes to mind, which I'm sure you all remember, I believe it was a 4th down, maybe, Cam, but he made a really nice play in coverage. Again, he's a seasoned guy. He has experience at Alabama, Tennessee, a lot of experience in the SEC, which is kind of what you need on the field right now. This isn't a shot at Jaden Kennedy, but he's got some work to do. He really didn't play at all last year, I think, due to injury. And before that, he transferred from Tulane. So he's got to get a little more experience with Pete Golding and just really settle his feet in. But again, a lot of time to get better. But I love to see Turnage on the field. In terms of the offense, Cam, sloppy, really sloppy. But, I mean, you put up 40 points. You get to win by a huge amount. So that's a great sign, especially for Ole Miss, because, again, I haven't been a lifelong Ole Miss fan, but the senses from what I gathered was this is a game that Ole Miss might even lose in the past because of how they played. So I think it's really exciting and promising that you win 40-6 on the road against a Power 4 opponent in a pretty ugly fashion.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the Georgia kind of playing down to their opponent. I know you just you don't want to look too far ahead, especially if you're an Ole Miss fan. You don't want to look at, the rat poison and take that in. But Ole Miss, if you look on ESPN, the matchup, Ole Miss is favored in that matchup now. I wouldn't have believed Ole Miss would be favored in that matchup if you asked me at all this season, especially not this early in the season. But we'll have to see how that goes down the line.
Right.
But yeah, you mentioned the the 50 yards rushing for Wake Forest this past game. Ole Miss has allowed the least amount of yards in the country through the first 3 games. The only team ahead of them is Ohio State, who's played 2 games, only 100 yards allowed total rushing through 3 games. I don't think I've seen an Ole Miss defensive line as good as this before. The only time I can recall that they've been at least remotely this close to being this good is 2015, 2014, that era when Hugh Freeze had Ole Miss kind of at a premier team, top 15 team there. But really, this defense is a whole different unit than they've ever been in the Ole Miss past. And I mean, the secondary struggles at times. There's still blown coverages every now and then. That's always going to be a communication thing. We mentioned before, the linebackers are the guys that have the headsets on, so it's kind of hard for those guys to communicate on the back end all the time, especially not having played together. But also, I like how you mentioned Brandon Turnage. That final play at the end, that final play on 4th down to bat a ball down. He's been playing really well. Like you mentioned, Jason Kennedy coming off injury last year, didn't play a lot. I really like how Kennedy's played this year. I think he plays really downhill for a safety. I think he's a guy that wants to go up and make a tackle. Him and Lewis Moore, kind of similar type of guys that'll go up and just get in there and make a tackle. But I really like what I've seen out of Brandon Turnage. Trey Amos continues to shine. I believe I mentioned to you this, Zach, this past week when we were at one of the press conferences showing you Trey Amos has 10 tackles this season. Every one of them are solo tackles. Yeah. He's a safety blanket out there. It seems like, I guess, when if you throw a screen out there or anything, you don't have to worry about Trey Amos needing any help. He'll get the guy to the ground. He also has 2 pass deflections this year and an interception. I think Amos is going to be that guy that's going to hopefully take the best wide receiver out of the game for Ole Miss going down the road when you're playing better teams and big-time receivers. I really like the way Pupal has played. I believe me and you talked about that too, how Pupal was getting held on one of those plays, reached out with one hand and still made a tackle. And I believe it was on a 4th down, or maybe it was on a 3rd down to force a punt, but it was a big play in that moment for Pupal. And I don't even believe he's starting at outside linebacker. I believe Corey Coleman and Daugherty start the game. I think it was looking this past week on PFF. Pupal does have more snaps right now than Corey Coleman, so I would assume that Pupal probably will be in that starting lineup soon. But even if not, it seems like he's getting the reps he deserves, anyways. But yeah, other than those guys, I think Ole Miss, the defense as a whole, has played really great. Like you said as well, the offense didn't play the greatest last week, but even in not playing the greatest, you still look good. You still ran the ball really well with Henry Parrish, and you did turn the ball over more times than you have all year, but still looked really good on offense at times.
Yeah, Cam. And again, it's kind of Jackson and Lane said it. I think it's what this team needed. If you go into Wake Forest and you win 75-0, I think then it starts to become a problem with the rat poison. Like, wow, really no one can stop us. And then you go up against Georgia Southern and it's the game you had against Wake Forest. And now you have less time to adjust when you're entering SEC play against Kentucky. So I do enjoy the fact that it happened on the road. You get some experience there, and now you get to play a Georgia Southern team who, they're 2-1, nothing special. I believe Ole Miss is a 35 or 35.5 point favorite. Cam, something along those lines, something crazy. For all the bettors out there, I believe they have covered the spread every game. So until they kind of give you a reason not to, I would say, yeah, maybe take Ole Miss minus 35.5, which sounds crazy. But getting back to Georgia Southern, I think they played Boise State, I believe, in week 1. They're a great program. They got an elite running back, and they played them close. I think it was a high-scoring game, 54-40 something. But again, it was close.
56-45, I believe, and I think Georgia Southern was only trailing by 4 points at one point in that game.
Yeah, so close game. They have potential. I think they're going to be a step up from Middle Tennessee and Furman without a doubt. But I fully expect Ole Miss to handle their business. The main thing for me this weekend is to really try and stay healthy as much as possible. We saw Jared Ivey exit the game, which shouldn't be a huge concern, but I wouldn't expect him to play this weekend. I'm expecting them to rest him for Kentucky. But just especially with the offensive weapons, when Trey Harris got taken out of the game last week, I was freaking out, Cam. I don't want to see that this week. Let's preserve everyone. So that way when homecoming week rolls around with Kentucky coming to town, we can go full throttle and go 1-0 in SEC play.
Absolutely. And I like how you mentioned preserving veteran players going into SEC play. It seems like these first 3 weeks kind of flown by. SEC plays right around the corner.
Yeah.
You got military appreciation game this week in the vault. Next week, you got homecoming in the vault. First SEC game against Kentucky. I do have in my notes here that I mentioned. I believe maybe we'll see how this game goes, but I think maybe you'll see the starters play a little bit longer. And I want to bring back up last game a little bit, just because at times I remember just people texting me throughout the game, just family members or whoever was watching the game. I get texts throughout the game all the time, just people asking me questions. Yeah. And I remember having a lot of people asking me, why are Ole Miss players laying down on the field to stop the clock? And I've known people who have seen this problem before with Ole Miss teams in the past. You've seen Texas A&M do it against Ole Miss in the past. Other teams do it against Ole Miss in the past. It's not the greatest thing to do. It's not the most sportsmanship thing to do when you lay on the ground and get the clock to stop. But I understand it from a standpoint of you gotta come into perspective that these guys have only played about 4 quarters. The starters have, at least, going into that Wake Forest game. They played 2 quarters against Middle Tennessee and 2 quarters against Furman. For the most part, the starters, the guys are out there every play. So if you're a 300-pound lineman running up and down the field every play, every once in a while you're going to want to break, especially when that third quarter rolls around and you're still on the field.
Yeah.
And I expect maybe you'll see a couple of those guys that some of the coaches don't think are in as best shape as the other guys play a little bit longer this week, just so they can get those reps going in the SEC play. But I agree, you got guys like Trey Harris, like Jared Ivey will be out this week. You got other guys like Nolan, who's came off limping a couple of times. Guys like Princely, who's came off limping a couple of times. Just make sure those guys are healthy. Those guys that you know are experienced and ready to play in SEC play. And if those guys are healthy, that's all that really matters. And you can make sure everyone else gets the reps in order to be ready for SEC play. But yeah, going back into Georgia Southern a little bit, I wanted to mention just kind of like a little scouting report of Georgia Southern. They're coached by Clay Helton, former longtime USC coach. I believe he coached there for about 7 years before Lincoln Riley was there. Not too much of that. Don't know too much about him other than that. But they do have a solid quarterback. He threw it around 50 times in that Boise State loss. I think he threw it like 40 times the next week in the win against Nevada to bounce back. They have not rushed it well at all this year. 320 yards total rushing on the year. For reference, Henry Parrish has 338 by himself. They have 321 as a team. So they're not going to rush it very well, probably not this weekend either. Against a fierce Ole Miss defensive line, so a chance for Ole Miss to hold a team under 50 rushing yards again. They've allowed the 3rd most rushing yards in the country, so it should be a big day for guys like Parrish, Matt Jones. Maybe we see Bentley kind of get going a little bit. We haven't really seen too much out of him these past couple of weeks. He's kind of been the 3rd back, and Kiffin kind of, I guess, confirmed that this past week that Matt Jones and Parrish were ahead of Bentley right now. But like you said, too, this isn't a team that Ole Miss should take lightly. I think Georgia Southern will be a better competition than it has been the past couple of weeks, just considering off the teams they played this year and teams they played in the past. I know in the past they've upset a team like Florida. So this definitely isn't a team that Ole Miss shouldn't take lightly. But I still have Ole Miss in a big win. I got Ole Miss 52-16. I got them giving up their first touchdown. I don't think the offense will slow down, but I do think they'll go with their first touchdown. I also have Ole Miss still holding Georgia Southern under 50 yards rushing.
100%. I couldn't agree more with the rushing aspect, Cam. Again, I think this is going to be a better test for the secondary because, like you said, this guy slings it, man. He's thrown the ball 110 times. For example, I got Jackson Dart's stats pulled up here. He's thrown the ball 88 times. So 20 more attempts than Jackson, and Dart's throwing the ball, it feels like 100 times a game.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's finding more length, and Parrish is establishing the run game. But regardless, they're going to throw it, and I think that's exactly what this defense needs at this point in time. In terms of a score, I'm going to go – let's go 45-9, Cam. Defense doesn't allow a touchdown. Again, I kind of got to go with you for the prop bet. There's no chance Georgia Southern's rushing over 50 yards, which sounds ridiculous, but their rushing attack –
It does sound ridiculous.
their rushing attack is garbage, just to be straight up with you guys. And this Ole Miss defensive line – kind of more credit to them. They don't let you run. You know, those gaps are filled quickly with guys like Pupal, Daughtery, and obviously those absolute animals up there in the front. So I think it's going to be a good weekend. Preserve our health, and let's get another win, Cam. This is a weird transition. What do you think about the new helmets?
Yeah, good to end it with that. I completely forgot about that.
I had to bring it up.
I kind of like the new look. I think I remember us texting back and forth. They may look a little gray, especially under the light, with the reflection. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see when they come, and I think they'll look better in a daylight game. And I
I
think
agree.
that's kind of the move there with going. I think they said they're running for the Oklahoma game. I think that game's scheduled for like a noonish kickoff. So they'll play it in the daytime. I'm curious to see what uniform combo it is. Considering it's Oklahoma, I guess they'll throw the navies with it. We'll have to see what they throw with it. But I think it'll look good on the field. The pitchers maybe didn't do it justice as it could have, but I like that Ole Miss is mixing it up. I like that they're trying to bring in new uniforms. One thing I wish Ole Miss would bring back is the white accents. I mean, the white jerseys with the navy accents. I wish they bring that back.
Yeah. Dude, and those I think those would really play with the uniform or with the helmet at least. I'm curious to see what combination they roll out with this. My brain was struggling to find if it was a reflection or part of the camouflage trick on the helmet. So I do like them. I just I thought they needed to be displayed in a different fashion when there wasn't daylight
Absolutely,
on it. And I'm just curious to see how they look on the field. I
absolutely.
will say I do like the Potter Real Tree ones more. Um, but I do enjoy the fact that they're changing it and continue to keep Tyler Jordan, Bill, all those guys from Real Tree involved. They're huge, huge donors to the Grove Collective, and they do a great thing with their company as well. So I'm glad that they're involved. And again, I'm fired up to see what uniform combo they roll out there, especially for such a huge weekend against Oklahoma.
Absolutely. I think that's all we got for you guys for football. I wanted to end it with a little bit of just update on some other sports. I know these past couple podcasts kind of just been strictly football, really all that's been going on right now. But men's hoops will begin in a little over a month, October 27th. They have an exhibition game scheduled against Illinois. Women's hoops has not yet released the non-conference schedule, but pretty soon they'll probably be releasing that, especially with an exhibition game coming up pretty soon. Ole Miss baseball as well will be starting fall ball pretty soon. September 27th is when they'll start their first intra-squad game, and they'll be having intra-squad games every weekend after that for the rest of fall ball. They'll have 2 games against other opponents, exhibition games. They'll host North Alabama on October 5th, and they'll host Samford on October 19th. So just keep an eye out for those. I believe those games are free to attend as Ole Miss fans, those exhibition games for baseball. And hoops is right around the corner. They're going to be a top 25 ranked team this year. I expect to be one of the top in the SEC. So in both women's and men's. So going to be exciting to see that there. I think that's all we got for you guys though. So just make sure to tune into the rebelwalk.com for all your Ole Miss sports needs.